this trend of high income inequality rising, high land prices pushing up the heights of buildings, and the need to build luxury apartments in many cases, and a lot of people renting and owning properties that they don't ever live in. So should there be any sort of action taken against this trend, to maybe a residency requirement or a special tax on owning property in high rises that you don't actually live in?
I wouldn't think so. I think the market will drive itself through various cycles. Sydney is growing all the time, there's greater demand, and there is a general increase in high-rise living rather than spreading out, because we're governed by our coastal range. I think we in particular on Central Park, we contributed $32 million to affordable housing. So we've made a large contribution to the government to construct affordable housing. So yeah, I think those sorts of things continue, where government will spend that money accordingly in areas and to a design that people can afford to live in.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are. I mean, the problem exists everywhere where people want to live. So when a city gets more attractive, more people want to live there, and it starts growing, and then the prices go up, and it's the same problem everywhere. And what you do against that, I'm not sure. Usually the mayors like it because they crank up the taxes, and everybody has to pay property taxes. So it's not like you get a free ride and you can just let your apartment sit there for a long time. So I think there's a balance that you need to find with these kinds of things. The investments are welcome, create jobs, keep the economy going, and create. I mean, you have to remember that Paris, for instance, the boulevards were full of expensive apartments. That's where the wealthy people were living. And a century later, it's the middle class that lives there. So it's not that obvious. Things change over time between places, and it's all in flux.
Do you think there's a topic that's under-addressed in tall building design development today that you think should be talked about more, or at a higher level, or in a different way? And what would it be?
Well,
either one.
You can see that when population is growing and cities are growing, and you're trying to build sustainable cities, you're going to end up having high-rise. The question that comes now is what do these towers do in the city? How do they manifest the growth of the city, and what do you want to manifest there, and how do they work amongst each others? We always see the high-rise as this individual artwork out of context, and the interesting question I find is if you look at them as a group, as a crop of high-rises, and what are they doing to the city, and maybe could we find ways of making that a positive contribution, and also when you have clusters of high-rises, how do they create a public space? What kind of new public space do we have for this type of building? There's a Rockefeller Center here in New York, and that's an early example of where there has been some level of coordination, but a lot of these mega projects end up being fairly disappointing, so that answers the question.
Also want to ask if there's a tall building project that you admire, that you would want to emulate, or a feature of it that you would like to see replicated, or if there's a building that you really admire that you would like to change an aspect of and improve upon it, what would it be?
Well, the skyscraper that I admire the most would be one that isn't built yet, and you're always hoping for something better the next year, and you're trying to do better yourself. But the issues are those: what are the public spaces? How is the city being improved by these projects? And how do we handle this density without becoming monotonous? I'm thinking of people like Frank Gehry and especially the planning projects that he's been doing. I find that interesting. This amazing ability that he has of magically bringing down the density somehow visually, because I've seen buildings of his that are 13 floors tall, and they appear like a 7-foot tall building. So these kinds of effects are interesting. It has to do with fragmentation that he's doing, but that would be one direction I find interesting.
Go ahead.
I was just say, I think one of the things that from planning and everything within Sydney, There are sometimes very regimented controls you must be doing and certain requirements you must meet, which is tending to stifle, I think, the creativeness of a lot of architects. And one thing I must say with John Nouvel, we've got something different going with Central Park. And I think that's important no matter where in the city. But in a city where you have high-rise residential, you need pockets with residential and with commercial mixture. So no part of a city is dead after hours or something like that. You need the vitality and the vibrance of the street life to keep areas going.
Do either of you think that wood will become a primary tall building material within the next 10 years? And why or why not?
Well, we've seen some use of wood in tall buildings. There's a building in Düsseldorf that I've seen. It's mainly the facade. They used it for the mullions on the inside, and then there's aluminum on the outside. I think that's feasible and interesting because it's a little tiring. The whole curtain wall business has gotten a little tiring. We've seen about every type of curtain wall you can possibly imagine. And we're looking for new materials and new ways of bringing texture and relief to the facade, on high rises.
I think just with different technologies these days, and I think climate has a lot to do with it, and maintenance of high-rise buildings. You obviously try to make something that is as least cost-effective in maintaining the building. Sometimes they get very expensive, and the replacement material and the maintenance you have to do, whereas today's modern materials, I think, are more viable in that respect. Certainly timbers and everything like that are being used in Australia now, and certainly through Europe and everything like that up to various levels. I think a lot of people are looking now to modulise as much buildings as possible, to erect them as quickly as possible, and get them up in modular blocks rather than, in Australia, reinforced concrete floor by floor going up. So.
Let's talk about One Central Park a bit. Tell the skeptics why organic shading is not just window dressing, in this case, literally, like what performance benefits it gives, and why it's a viable design field.
Well, it has to do with the conditions under which you're doing this. If you don't have a recycling system for the water, you're just wasting water, because you're putting drinking water into the planters, let the water evaporate and disappear in the sewer. So you have to recycle the water to begin with, and that means you have to have an economy of scale that allows to do that, as we have in this project. You also need to have a climate for this, because the way we're growing the plants in this project, it's hydroponic way, where the soil or the substrate isn't really soil, it's really just a way of holding the roots of the plants. So they're getting the nutrients from the water, and this kind of irrigation makes it possible in a really cold climate, because the roots would freeze. As soon as you have a long period of freezing, the plants would all die, and it'd be a disaster. You'd have to replace everything. So the climate in Sydney plays a role in the choice of this facade system. And then also window dressing. There are lots of ways of bringing, killing monotony on a building, and this could be one of them. But it's also a shading device. I mean, we thought at the time it's a subtropical climate there. You really have to do something about cutting heat gains in the building, not just for the energy performance, just for comfort too. Of course, these plants aren't accounted for in the energy calculations, because we can't prove in advance how many leaves each plant will make, or whether the whole system will even thrive at all. So we had to submit a rendering of the project without any plants at all to the city, because they're saying we want to see what this looks like if it doesn't work. And fortunately it does work, and we just still have to empirically find out over time what the savings are in energy. But we know from looking at the facades that there will be a significant amount of shading for the apartments, and that will bring down the cooling costs.
How do you manage the weight of all the I guess without soil that helps, but
Exactly.
the water still would add some weight, no?
I mean, so the soil was or soil mixture, if you want to call it, was specially designed for the weight, for the planter boxes that were, it's moulded plastic that was structurally designed with the engineers to fit in with the facade system. They also form light shelves in some respect and shading to the apartments, not only just the plants. And Jean Nouvel's design was to have a series of cascading plants going over the edge of the planter boxes, as well as vines growing up. So you had this mixture of plants on each way. So the soil mixture has a lot of very light material in it, just to bind it together for the root system. So that was one of the whole things. That the planter boxes, do you do them out of reinforced concrete, or do you do them out of glass fibre? Again, all those weights were sort of one of the things that was sort of restricting us. Hence the modular plastic design that we did with them.
The modular plastic design could be one example. Are there other topics, other specific techniques, interventions that you took on this project that you think could be widely applicable? The heliostats, the green walls, or are they specific to the climate, to the condition, to this project?
Well, the green walls have already been deployed in a lot of locations all across the globe. Patrick Blanc is the French botanist that we worked with on this project, and he had a really key role in this, because it's a Darwinian game here, and depending on where you are on the facade, you have different wind exposures, sun exposures, microclimates really across the entire envelope of the building. And the plants have to thrive in these microclimates without soil, and so you have to find the species that can do that, and you have to have the knowledge. Patrick is someone who can recite probably about 4,000 Latin names of plant species that he's personally researched all over the globe in jungles and on remote locations. And so he has a knowledge of which plant will survive in what environment. And so that was a key component of this. We couldn't do that without the scientific knowledge of the plants themselves, because they're life. They are not just a material. We use them as a building material, with their porosity, with their texture, with their color. We filter light, we frame the city views with them, but they're still alive creatures, and they have to thrive.
And so the system might look different from location to location, project to project, but the concept.
Yeah, it does. If you look at his green walls, it's never the same species.
How about the heliostats?
The heliostat is a technology that's been revived, actually. After in the 70s, they started working with this kind of power generation. And the sun tracking mirrors, and they usually used in solar power plants to focus the energy on a receiver tower, and then to drive a steam turbine and then generate electricity. And so there are dozens of examples already right now in Spain, in Southern California, so on, of such plants. So the technology has been revived. After the oil crisis, there was some interest, and then there was the neoconservative backlash, and then it picked up recently with the environmental concerns, and now we're mass producing these heliostats.
But you're talking mostly at a power plant scale. How about in the building technology application?
The exact same device. We just found the engineers that do this kind of work, and made them adapt them for the building, but they're the exact same technology. So we really just transplanted them, literally, with the difference that we're using a double reflection. So when you're in a power plant, the mirror reflects sunlight directly to the receiver. We are reflecting it onto another reflector, which then sends it down. Just gives us a lot more control over the use of that light and energy.
I want to ask just generally about the aesthetic of this building, and kind of also a bigger picture, I guess, about its impact, its legacy on the tall building world. And I'd like to hear maybe both of your thoughts on this, probably the last question. So I and a lot of people would see this, the greenery is beautiful, kind of inherently, especially when it's been curated, or whatever word you want to use, by a botanist. But I imagine a lot of people would see it as messy, or in general, even if you don't see it as a negative, it's very contradictory to decades of status quo in tall building design, which is this clean, antiseptic glass and steel aesthetic. Do you think tenants, clients, are people in the general public receptive to this sort of incorporation of greenery throughout tall building design? And is it something you think will catch on?
Yeah, look, I think from our residents' point of view, they just find it fantastic. Being in their apartment, looking out through greenery, rather than, you say, the very clinical, just curtain wall system or something like that. The ability of our facade system, we've got it so you can open it up in various sections and you can almost touch the plants sort of thing. They're there on vines and creepers in front of you. And I think aesthetically from people who have viewed the building, just find it so completely different, and seeing something as an environment of something growing up there where people have never seen plants grow before. Invariably low-rise buildings have planter boxes and things like that, but Patrick Blanc's vegetable walls, up until recently, we're doing them at a height never been done before. We've got 5 kilometres of planter boxes around the building, growing all different types of plants. There's 38,000 plants in Patrick's 1,200 square metres, plus in the 5 kilometres we've another 78,000 plants. So there's an enormous amount of plants that are growing, changing colour. From people observing the building from across the road. I was in the UTS building, which is sometimes some people describe not an attractive building. We're looking back onto certainly Central Park and looking at the changing colours. They feel it's just wonderful environment, getting out there and working, looking out at something that's changing every day. And the colour selections that Jean Nouvel has selected around the building, it's not as though it's all one particular colour in one spot. There's a variety of colours around the building to suit the seasons.
There seems to be a sort of human preference for living flowers over aluminum louvers or dots on glass, and it's confirmed by the sales numbers of the projects. It really took off very quickly. We got a lot of good feedback from people for this, because it's hard to get people out of terrace houses with a backyard into a similar size, perhaps, apartment or smaller apartment, and then without that contact to nature. And Sydney is a city where within 10 minutes you have, from almost every point in the city, at least a beach or a cove on the harbour or 2 or 3 parks. So people have a connection to the outdoors, and this building tries to give that back to them, even though it's building this density up in the center of the city.